Louise?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, if you want, I'll admit people are in the waiting room, and if you want, you can suggest to them that we'll wait 1 more minute for more people to arrive, or however you like, but maybe just welcome the folks that get dumped in at the start.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll do a more formal introduction in a couple of minutes, but I'm hoping that a few more people will join, so we'll just give them an opportunity to join us. I thought it might be nice so we can get an idea of where everyone is, if you could just say hi in the chat and let us know where you're joining from today, because I think we've got quite an international group here.
While we're waiting for people to come in, should we start the introductions after everybody gets in, or how?
Yeah, I think I might just wait another minute or two just so that anyone who's joining, won't miss any important information. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning for the second of our climate heritage narratives. So these are, I'm just going to make sure I have all my notes that I'm trying to speak from up in front of me to begin with. So these sessions are about youth-led care for culture and how that can drive climate action. And the timing of this particular session is really good because the Youth for Climate in Milan started yesterday. So as we're joining here, there's also colleagues joining to discuss there. And as I said, this is the second one. We had some really good conversations on Monday under the theme of sustainable heritage tourism, and today we're going to be talking about the theme of traditional knowledge and skills. We've got some brilliant speakers for you, and then we're going to have a discussion. So the format that we're going to have today is we have speakers. Some of those are pre-recorded because of the challenges with different time zones, and we have one speaker with us this morning. Well, it's this morning here where I am in Scotland, and they're going to be speaking live. So if you have any questions, I'll let you know who is speaking live and who is a video. And of course, if you have any questions for speakers who've sent us a pre-recording, then we can pop a question in the chat, we can feed that back to them, and we can try and get that out to you. So after the speakers, then we'll go into some breakouts for discussion. And I know that we've particularly aimed this at, it's intergenerational, but young people. So if you're not as familiar with having these conversations in the breakouts, that's okay. Just join, let people know that you're early on in your career or you're a student, and listen to what people have to say. And if you have anything to add, then please contribute, but don't feel that you're pressured to speak just by joining a group. And after that, we'll come back and have a few minutes of feedback and a bit of a summary of what's happened in the conversation. So this is the first session. The second one is going to be later today, so that hopefully allows people from as many different time zones to join in the discussion as possible. And after that, we'll pull everything together into one kind of summary, along with the summaries from the session earlier this week and the session next week as well. So hopefully that's given you an overview of what we're going to be talking about. Our first speaker today has sent us a video, and that's Gul Akhtarak. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that properly, but they'll introduce themselves. She is a PhD student at the Department of Architecture at TU Delft in the Netherlands, and she's got a really interesting presentation, which is about I can't see the actual title. It's about cultural heritage in Turkey. So, as I say, this is pre-recorded, and I've had a little listen to the start of it, and it sounds really interesting to me. So if we can go ahead and get that playing. Just while that's getting lined up, I'll introduce my colleague Yolo, who is helping with a lot of the things today and has helped pull this session together. And hopefully she's ready to play the video.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Hello everyone, my name is Gul Akhtarak.
And if you just
I'm a
pop
PhD
that into full
candidate
screen.
at TU Delft in the Department of Architecture. Today I will be presenting you the potentials of vernacular heritage for building climate resilience, the case of Fındıklı Rize. This is a part of my PhD studies, and also it's in publication progress with Hannah Flagg from Historic England, who also presented this case in Venice Biennale this year. Vernacular buildings were built by in response to local geographic, topographic, and social, economic, and cultural conditions of the time and space. There is a strong link between communities, land, and water that shape the vernacular landscapes that we see today. But unfortunately, much of this traditional knowledge is forgotten, and the generations adapted them according to their needs and the conditions of the time and their time and space. Climate change is right now threatening this type of culture, this form of cultural heritage, and this local knowledge actually can teach us a lot about climate resilient settlements. And the interviews with locals on past and present climate practices can help us understand building climate resilience through looking at vernacular settlements. I visited the district of Fındıklı of Rize in 2019. It's located in the northeast part of Turkey, and this city is rich with its natural and cultural heritage sites, and it also consists of a lot of historic vernacular settlements. And these spots that you see in the map actually show the villages that I conducted the interviews with the locals. This area receives highest humidity and precipitation in the whole country, and it experiences extreme rainfalls, floods, and landslides. Although vernacular buildings were built in a specific climate, these local climatic conditions are changing with global climate change, and they are under the threat of this changing climate. With changing climatic conditions, the severity and the frequency of these disasters have increased. So when we talk about these settlements, we said that they are built in line with the local conditions, but so the locals collected the stones from nearby rivers and chestnut timbers from the forest to build these houses with modular design. These decisions behind the construction of these settlements were not arbitrary. Vernacular houses are often equipped with necessary tools to be resilient to the surrounding, with their specific construction detailing. To give an example, the impact of prevalent winds is often lessened by the sloping of the traditional form and framing of the roofs. And here are the settlements are distant and scattered. And in the past, these buildings were built on the higher end of the cornfields, so that the rainwater carried the scat of the animal down to the slope to fertilize the land. This way, the locals were making sure that they could control the site, including their farmlands and the building. Here in the interviews revealed the past traditional climate knowledge and settlement and current problems of extreme rainfall, flooding, landslides, in addition to climate resilient features of the vernacular heritage. Floods caused the collapse of storage houses, which are built next to these buildings. And as they are lighter in weight, they can be easily drifted during flood. Beydere village was concurrently mentioned in the interviews as a disaster-prone area and affected by floods and landslides. Landslides caused the deterioration of these buildings. For instance, in the left image, on the left image, you see the exterior, the rear facade of the building is eradicated, and the homeowner rebuilt it with briquette wall. And today, the rear facades of the village houses are surrounded by retaining walls. But in the past, there was no need for this to construct the retaining wall behind these houses, as the walking pathway behind these buildings did not exceed 1.5 meters. the villages unfortunately have transformed with opening up the roads for vehicles, and also the villagers cleared the slopes for tea plantation through deforestation, and the deforestation took place in greater scales in time, and this led to an increase in the landslides. And in the case of the house in the bottom right, the building was rebuilt with the remaining materials of the historic building, which was burnt down by the bombs in Russian occupation from 1916 to 1918. And the successive generations lost the original building knowledge and experiences of this house, which was built 250 years ago. And the change of the main entrance to the rear facade exposed this facade to landslide risk. Now the homeowner plans to change the entrance of the building to locate it in its original place. And also in terms of extreme rainfalls, the area is actually damp, and therefore the month of July is known to be the rotten month. And this dampness and changes in temperature is causing the crop failures, and this is the main income of the villagers, and rainfalls become extremely dangerous with the prevalent winds which carry the precipitation. So in the case of top right image, the roof overhangs are not wide enough to protect the building facade from rainfalls which carry the precipitation. Thus, it decays faster. The which is plastered facade, as you can see in the right image in the first floor, and this is from the interviews we realized that this type of construction technique is extremely vulnerable to rainwater, and it decays faster. And the eaves of the historic buildings usually extend from 80 centimeters, secure from the precipitation and rainfalls, and the local roof tiling, known as Ottoman tile, also make a resilient roof covering. The major difficulty is to renovate the roofs as it costs more money. The Ministry of Environment and Urban Planning in Turkey announced the Regional Climate Action Plan in 2019 for this region, and the 15 actions to be taken in the region include several practices in the building sector, but the most relevant to cultural heritage is that the 13th article on encouraging the use of local materials and techniques in construction for climate resiliency. One important implication of such decision in the use of local materials and techniques is the legal exemption from any type of taxes, fees in the construction of houses. The knowledge of vernacular heritage is beyond understanding the material construction techniques that exceeds the culture and lifestyles of the users. The characteristics of these houses are their modularity, flexibility, adaptability, transformability, and reusability in an unfixed nature. The local knowledge of building resilient constructions can reduce the effects of new exposures and disasters. Investigation of such indigenous practices of underrepresented communities will allow access to specific climate knowledge and adaptation practices. The value of this knowledge should not be undermined in creation of climate policies, as they mention incentives on the use of local construction materials and techniques. Thank you for listening.
That was a great presentation. So we don't have Bill with us this morning, but if you do have any questions, do pop them in the chat, and we can hopefully connect with her afterwards and share that if anyone's got any pressing questions. So our next speaker is Dinara Pereira from the Cayman Islands. She is the Associate Director of the Mangrove Education Project and the former Lead Ranger of the Cayman Islands Mangrove Rangers. She has recently resumed her studies at the University of Leeds for a degree in Sustainability and Environmental Management. And she is speaking to us today about the mangrove, I think it's the mangrove wetlands in Cayman. Hopefully you'll have that video ready to go.
Hi, my name is Dinara Pereira. I am the Associate Director of the Mangrove Education Project, and I am the former Lead Ranger of the Cayman Islands Mangrove Rangers. My presentation today will be about understanding the role of the coastal lagoon ecosystem as a climate change mitigation strategy in small developing islands. So climate change will have a severe impact on economies and societies around the globe. The small islands are at the front line of this climate crisis despite having little contribution to it. So a lot of these impacts, such as sea level rise and increasing intensity of storms, is something that we are already starting to see in our homes. The coastal lagoon ecosystem consists of three main interdependent ecosystems, and it describes the interdependent relationships between mangroves, seagrass, and coral reefs. This is a nature-based solution that we have right now in our countries to help combat and mitigate against climate change. To give a brief overview, we have mangroves, which is known for the red mangrove because of its walking routes. They enhance biodiversity and protect our communities from storms. We have coral reefs. They are very popular because of the high biodiversity which live in it. They are also known to provide storm protection and food security. Last but not least, we have seagrass. Seagrass are threatened because what happens is we have this image of the perfect sandy beach. So seagrass are removed to create that visual. However, they are also accredited for storm and coastal protection, and they are biodiversity hotspot, and they help to stabilize the coastline and provide a valuable nursery habitat. So they are such an incredibly important resource, but they are undervalued. The functioning of the entire CLE is incredibly important because ecosystem services they provide is not only important for combating against climate change, but they are important for our economies and our societies because it helps our tourism, it helps our food security, it protects us from storms. But when you remove one aspect of the coastal lagoon ecosystem, the other components begin to work less effectively. So as you can see from the diagram, mangroves act as a fish nursery. So when those mangroves are absent, those fish are prey to predators, and therefore less adult fish can go out into the reefs. And that means it impacts our tourism, and it also impacts the fishing industry as well. There's also evidence to show that these ecosystems work better together rather than individually to protect our coastal communities. The protection of the coastal lagoon ecosystem is not only important for small islands, but they are important in the global context as well. They have something very special called blue carbon. And this is carbon that has been captured and stored by coastal and wetland ecosystems. And mangroves and seagrass are known to be more effective at carbon storage than terrestrial forests. As you can see from the picture, a lot of this carbon is stored below the ground. And this graph further reinforces the point that so much of this carbon is stored in the soil. And so that means we have centuries of carbon stored in that soil. So when we do remove it, what happens is that carbon is released into the atmosphere and it becomes a part of our climate problem right now. The small islands are expected to experience some of the devastating impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise and increasing intensity of storms. Unfortunately, we have lost a lot of mangroves. We lost a lot of mangroves globally and within the region, such as the Caribbean, which has lost 24% of the mangroves in the last quarter century. Unfortunately, the economic incentives to destroy coastal habitats outweighs the incentive to preserve these habitats. And this is due to the immediate economic benefits of destroying these habitats such as mangroves or seagrass and building new developments. So the CLE actively combats against climate change. In some areas, it's been shown that mangroves can build a land at a rate that matches sea level rise. And all three of these ecosystems work together as one to reduce storm surge, to maintain our fish population, to store carbon, and it is such an incredible resource that we have, and it is in an incredibly small size piece of land compared to large rainforests. However, they do work very effectively in that small space. This further goes to reinforce the important interdependent relationships between mangrove, seagrass, and coral reefs. And it's also important to highlight again that this isn't just important for climate change and mitigating against the impacts, but it is important for our economies and our society as well, because this is a part of tourism, it's a part of our fishing industry, it's a part of what makes life well in these countries. And so it's important that we preserve this aspect of our environment. Unfortunately, there are a lot of threats facing the coastal lagoon ecosystem. Some of these are man-made and some of these are natural. So we often have a lot of development and removal of mangroves. And recently we have the stony coral tissue loss disease in the Caribbean. There are also ocean acidification and sea level rise as well, which is impacting the functioning of this environment. Restoration is a viable tool when used appropriately, and it can form part of a regenerative approach to climate change. Unfortunately, it's very important that we need to remember that restoration is notoriously difficult and expensive, and it's not as valuable as protecting virgin land. For example, a 1-year-old mangrove tree does not provide the same benefits as a 30-year-old mangrove tree. It also does not have as much carbon stored in the soil as a 30-year-old mangrove tree. And Also, the time needed to grow these habitats to the extent where it can protect our communities is a very long time, and it's a time that we don't necessarily have right now, as we are starting to see storms become more intense, especially in the last few hurricane seasons. Therefore, it's important that we protect the remaining coastal lagoon ecosystem. Some of these solutions include legislation, so improving and strengthening environmental legislation, creating protected areas. For example, the Cayman Islands has the largest contiguous mangrove forest in the Caribbean, but it is not protected, and it is a vital part of life in Cayman and provides so many ecosystem services that we just can't see, which is, I suppose, is why it's not valued as much. And we also have economic and incentives that can be made and providing access to funding. We can integrate coastal lagoon ecosystem into new developments. So that means not destroying it and building around it to form an ecologically sound development. Education is also an important tool in simulating the cultural shift, because even within our own countries, these ecosystems aren't valued as much as they should be. So this includes changing our language. So we need to talk about the benefits the coastal lagoon ecosystem provides in practical terms. So by this, I mean food security, storm protection, economy. These are all very important attributes that are very personal to us. And it's important that we integrate the community into these solutions. That means using local knowledge, gaining the input, using this as a way to complement modern day science. And it's important that these solutions, whatever we do, has the backing of the community that lives in it. Finally, I have this quote: solutions to disasters must focus on reducing social disparities, not only on addressing environmental risks. Bioshields can be part of making whole communities stronger if implemented as part of a broader disaster prevention plan. So climate change is a social issue. The coastal lagoon ecosystem is part of a holistic response to climate change. It is something that is very valuable and can be used right now to protect our communities, but that is only one part of the response. However, as we go forward, it must be continued to be protected, and it has to be valued more than it is right now. Thank you.
I always don't know what to say when the speaker isn't here live with us. So I found that really interesting. And thank you, Yulo, for sharing, and thank you, Dinara, for the talk. So our next speaker is, we're moving to a totally different part of the world. So our next speaker is Kushi Shah, and she is here with us live this morning. So of course you can ask some questions. We'll save that for the end of all the speakers. So you can pop them in the chat, or you can keep them to ask directly. But just remember, while she's speaking, she's obviously not going to be watching the chat, so it won't be kind of live being answered. And Kushi is going to speak to us today about traditional construction practices from Northeast India, heritage value and challenges of conservation. And I'll just hand it over to you now.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. Let me know if my screen is visible.
It's just loading now. I can see it.
Okay, so yeah, hi everyone. Good afternoon from India. I am Kushi Shah, and I am a conservation engineer who's working on different conservation of built heritage of India. Today I'm going to present on the topic traditional construction practices from Northeast India, their heritage value and the challenges of conservation. This presentation is guided by Shankar Krishnadas sir as a part of the mentorship program of ICOMOS India. Heritage in India. India is a country gifted with abundance of natural and cultural heritage. It is an amalgamation of many cultures residing in India's 28 states and 8 union territories, all with different characteristics and civilizations. India has 6 major religions and countless other sects and tribal religions. There are a total of 121 languages, 270 mother tongues, and over 1,000 dialects spoken in India. All of this diversity plays a crucial role in contributing to the rich cultural heritage of India that we have. Shifting our focus to Northeast India, it consists of 8 states, namely Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, Tripura, and Sikkim. Because this is the northeast part of India is mostly popular for its wide landscapes. The history, the legends, and the engineering of these legends are far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. This place is gifted with exquisite tales and intangible crafts that often go unnoticed by an amateur eye. Coming to the point of to the state of Arunachal Pradesh, let me introduce you the Adi tribes of Arunachal Pradesh. The Adi tribes are the indigenous people and are one of the largest tribal group in the state. They live in the central region of the state. They have a reputation of being fierce warriors, and the inhospitable terrain in which they live have ensured the survival of Adi cultures for centuries. These tribes have different sub-tribes which differ from each other in many ways and customs. These tribes, unlike other tribal communities, do not reside very closely to each other. Their houses are built at a considerable distance from each other, although this in no way affects the kind of community engagement they have. The tribe, like most other tribes of India, functioned on a system similar to the barter system. That is, if a tribal member wants to construct a new house, the member from the community will chip in free of charge. In return, it is expected from the owner to host a feast for everyone. Hence, one can see that they share a strong community bond amongst each other. Coming to the construction practices of Adi tribes, these tribes survives on the hill plantation system. They cultivated wet rice and practiced shifting cultivation, and hence there was a need to move every year or so. As a result of which, they have adopted such a construction system that the entire substructure of the house can be uprooted from its place and relocated to other areas. The foundation of the house is similar to the wooden pile foundation system. Large chunks of timber are bored inside the soil at least 1 meter, depending upon the scale of the house. Why is it important to learn about the construction practices of these tribes? The best feature about this system is that it is a completely sustainable housing. 70% of materials are locally sourced. No material goes to waste. The waste created from cutting of bamboo is also used to make threads which are used to tie the roofs. And the bamboos are very long lasting and have very good fire safety aspects to it. The houses are raised above the ground with the help of stilts, and the wooden bamboo beams tied with each other act as the flooring for the house. The finishing is done in such a way that any additional food that is left can directly be thrown down to feed other animals. Doors and window systems of this house is also a distinguishing example of the architectural wisdom shown by these tribes. The house is projected downward, much so from outside, such that the doors and windows less visible. It ensures that no water ingresses inside the house since the area witnesses heavy rainfall. Moreover, this type of system is also safest for the earthquake-prone areas. Sorry. I don't know what happened. Yeah. So these are some of the photographs of the traditional houses of the Ade tribes. As you can see, the roof is lowered down to provide privacy, and doors and windows are not visible from outside. Another notable feature of this house is the eco-friendly roofing system. The roofs are made by drying the leaves of palm trees that grow in the surrounding region. The advantage of using this system is that the temperature of the interior is maintained through these leaves and the heat is not reflected inside the house. Each dried leaf is tied to the bamboo beams with the help of bamboo threads. This gives a very unique type of aesthetic appearance to the interior of this house, as you can see here in this picture. Now, coming to the another state, Assam. Let me introduce you to the Ahom dynasty of Assam. The Indian history is rich of tales from different parts of the country. There has been various rulers and shifts in power over the period of centuries. For example, the Mughal dynasty existed for around 300 years, British ruled for 200 years, etc. But one of the unique dynasty that existed in the Indian history that ruled the northeastern parts of India for more than 500 years is and has defeated the Mughals 17 times in a span of 60 years is called the Ahom dynasty. The Ahoms created a new state by taking over the old political systems of the Bhuyans, also known as landlords. Ahoms had expanded their influence and built a large state by the 16th century. The system of governance established by Ahoms was similar to the system of Tai Namachu, which was from South India, Southwest China. The Ahoms inherited a large tradition of large but impermanent buildings of timber and thatch, which were structurally perfect and aesthetically beautiful. Ahom kings also made the immediate environment of monuments like temples earthquake resistant by creating water bodies nearby and using stone boulders underneath the structures. The water tank and the ditches around the monuments play a very crucial role in making the monuments earthquake resistant. So now let us focus on the earthquake resistant techniques of these monuments. Assam as a state falls under the category of zone 5, which is a very high damage risk zone. Assam witnesses several massive earthquakes, including the one in 1950 whose magnitude was 8.7 on the Richter scale. A team of experts from IIT Kanpur studied Ahom monuments in the Sivsagar district. They focused on two main monuments. One is the Talatal Ghar and the other is Karen Ghar. These are some of the pictures of the same, as you can see here. Using GPR, that is the ground penetrating radar, to study Talatal Ghar, they found that the underground foundation walls, which are the extension of the walls built above them, had separate walls which were built parallel to these walls. And the space between the two walls were packed with earth so that they could bear the impact of earthquakes. The foundation of these structures were made with clay stick and the river boulders. The water tables in the water bodies like the Sivsagar tank around all these monuments and structures were maintained at the level of the foundation of these structures so that they remain wet throughout the year. Beneath the boulders lies a thick layer of clay, and the water from the tanks and ditches on both sides of the temples and all the other structures fills the gap between the boulders. As a result of this, whenever an earthquake strikes, the intensity is diluted by the clay layers, boulders, and water around it. Hence, during the Ahom era, the rulers had ensured digging of hundreds of ponds in the vicinity of these buildings. This was done to make sure that the water level of the ponds are at a certain level so they could constantly fill up the gap between the boulders. Coming to the materials used in the construction, the Ahom architecture mainly used wood and bamboo as the principal material for the construction. After the construction, the numerous buildings were decorated beautifully with different colors and craft works. Although in the later centuries, they started building masonry constructions as well from the wooden form. They knew the different brick making techniques and designed them with different shapes and sizes. These bricks were later covered with the blood of leeches. It is stated that Ahoms made an indigenous type of cement, which was known as karhal. Some of the raw materials used in the preparation of this kind of cement were sticky rice, jacquerie, duck egg, snail slime, fish intestines, and resin of sal trees, etc. Since we do not have much time, I will directly come to the point of why is the conservation of these buildings important. The traditional and indigenous knowledge, practices, social customs, rituals, and worldviews all together offer community resilient approaches. It offers guidance in adapting to a changing climate and assists us in mitigating the effects of climate change. It helps us recognize and realize the inequalities that has been created in our societies and how the advanced technologies used by these minority groups are being forgotten and underestimated. Recognizing and acknowledging these heritage assets furthers our aim of establishing global values and solidarity amongst various different communities. The challenges of conservation. Climate adaptation, resilience, and traditional knowledge and practices are all interrelated to each other. But the lack of proper integration of these topics, alongside minimum awareness about the construction methodology and conservation approach, often results in a disastrous outcome. Even with the right intent, it destroys the entire integrity of the building and alongside it, the history of already marginalized communities. The introduction of new materials without thorough research not only ruins the heritage value of the building, but it also affects the sustainability of the building. One such example is demonstrated here. As you can see in the picture, now concrete is used as the foundation. This has severe other implications on the environment. Concrete is not a local material in the Himalayan range and thereby increasing the carbon footprint of the project substantially. Additionally, production of concrete is said to be responsible for 4 to 8% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. By expanding our concrete footprint, we are taking over fertile soil and covering our habitats that form a vital role in our ecosystems. So, similarly, for the Ahom dynasty, if the water level of the ponds are not maintained and are affected, disturbed owing to the human activities, it will lead to collapse of these monuments. Additionally, due to lack of technical expertise, very less technical information about all of these construction monuments is available. And hence it becomes very difficult to effectively conserve these buildings. Furthermore, there is a lot of conflicting information available, which makes the conservation even more difficult. Coming to the conclusion, it is important to ensure that the conservation of these structures is done sensitively. The color of the structure and the materials used should not be affected in the name of conservation. Cultural heritage and narratives shapes our landscapes and influence discourse and action related to environmental sustainability. Learning from the experience and holistic worldviews of indigenous people aids in reconnecting people with the nature and bridge the nature-culture divide that has formed with the rapid urbanization. The indigenous knowledge provides us an excellent alternative tools to mitigate climate change and adopt more sustainable practices. Yeah. So that is it.
Thank you, Kushi. That was really fascinating. And yeah, I found it really, really interesting. We're going to move on to our final speaker now, but will you be with us for the rest of the session? So if people have any questions, we can put them to you after this final video. Is that okay?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so our final speaker today is Catherine Childs. We're actually going back to the Cayman Islands now. So there might be some crossover with the earlier talk that we heard, but the focus is a bit different. And I think you'll see that Catherine's providing a bit more of an overview of some things. So I think it's still really worthwhile to have these two speakers from the same small place. So Catherine is the Environmental Programs Manager for the National Trust for the Cayman Islands. And today she is going to speak to us about I've lost where I had that as well. Okay. Yolo, do you have Catherine's talk lined up ready to go?
Yeah, sure.
Hi, I'm Catherine Childs. I work at the National Trust for the Cayman Islands. I'm their Environmental Programs Manager, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you guys a little bit about climate justice and intergenerational equity and nature-based solutions for the climate crisis, all things I feel really passionate about. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this, this event that we're having before the COP. So thanks for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen now so that I can show a little presentation for you guys that I hope that you will enjoy. So as I said, my topic is climate justice and the preservation of natural heritage. My name is Catherine Childs, and I am the Environmental Programs Manager for the National Trust for the Cayman Islands, as well as the founder of Island Offsets, which is a carbon offsets NGO also located in the Cayman Islands. So it's worth mentioning that just a few weeks ago, the Secretary General for the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, warned that the world is on a catastrophic pathway to 2.7 degrees of warming by the end of the century. He urged countries to declare climate emergencies and to achieve climate neutrality as quickly as possible. And I think we're all familiar with the fact that we're going to have sea level rise and there's going to be greater storms and more droughts and more flooding. But something that's worth mentioning as well is that the IPCC has said that we also are going to see undermined livelihoods. Culture and identity is going to be compromised. We'll see increasing migration, which will put a lot of stress on the places that people are migrating from, but also places that they're trying to get to, as we're seeing already, and also the challenge of the ability of states to provide conditions necessary for even human security in these places. So that raises the question of climate justice. The truth is the impacts of climate change will not be borne equally or fairly between the rich and the poor, women and men, and older and younger generations. Consequently, there's been a growing focus on climate justice, which looks at the climate crisis through a human rights lens, and on the belief that by working together, we can create a better future for both past and future generations. So the adverse impacts of a warming climate aren't felt equally by everyone. And often, unfortunately, it's the least responsible for the climate crisis that we see today that are in fact going to suffer its gravest consequences. So communities of color, women, indigenous groups, and people of lower income all face an increased vulnerability to climate change. These groups will be disproportionately impacted, in fact, by heat waves, air quality, and extreme weather events. So low-income communities and young people, they're going to face the worst effects of this climate crisis, and they need to be prepared. And what is particularly unfair is that many of the countries that have contributed very little to the problem of climate change are in fact the ones that are going to suffer the worst. What makes it particularly egregious is that many of these higher income countries got rich by the extraction of natural resources from the less developed countries. So it's almost like these developing countries are being victimized twice in a way. And the developing countries also typically have limited social and financial resources to fight the effects of global climate change. So the ability of populations to migrate and adapt to the negative consequences that we're expecting are shaped by factors such as income, race, class, gender, capital, and political representation. And people living in poverty or in precarious circumstances tend to have neither the resources nor the insurance coverage necessary to recover from these environmental disasters. Additionally, they often have less say and involvement in decision-making, political and legal processes that relate to climate change and the natural environment. So they tend to be victimized by that as well. Plus, they're often depending on traditional activities such as agriculture, livestock rearing, and fishing. So any kind of change in the climate, such as droughts and flooding, can have significant effects on their livelihood. Climate justice is saying that we need to curb climate change within the Paris targets of 1.5 degrees Celsius to prevent the worst impacts on the natural ecosystems, because they can be so severe as that they will severely and permanently affect many populations around the world. Small island states and other low-lying areas are particularly at risk. In wealthy countries, the climate crisis is of course of concern, but in many countries that, and again, these ones hardly contributed to the climate crisis in the first place, these changes could be a matter of life and death. We hear leaders of countries talking about this being an existential crisis. It's in fact literally an existential crisis in these countries. So populations of small island states face also the loss of their cultural heritage and natural diversity. So what we have so far is we have a Barbados Plan of Action for the Sustainable Development of Small Island States, plus the Rio +20 outcome. And both of those things point to climate-related problems related to small island states, and they call for more support to support these countries. Also, the Green Climate Fund was created in 2016, and that's provided further support by providing financial assistance to these developing countries for their adaptation planning. And we also see other funding sources that are coming forward to improve climate finance. But unfortunately, we are not seeing enough. There's been a lot of promises on the world stage and at previous COPs, and unfortunately, they haven't really delivered to the extent necessary to help these countries to adapt and to prepare and to become resilient for the effects of climate change. This picture to me speaks volumes. So this is the president of the Maldives, and this is right before COP21, which is when the Paris Agreement was signed. And he had everybody in his parliament learn how to scuba dive, and then they had their parliamentary meetings underwater, and they signed the Paris Agreement underwater to have this photo op to show the rest of the world what they're facing. They're trying to say this is where we will be before too long unless you guys get serious and sign these agreements and make real changes. We're the victims, and we need to get serious on the world stage. Of course, that was COP21 in Paris. It was a long time ago, and not enough has really changed. We also need to talk about the idea of intergenerational equity. That means between generations, that the older generation has a duty, a responsibility to leave something behind for the next generation coming behind them. So it's interesting that the world counts 1.8 billion people between the ages of 10 and 24, and 90% of those young people live in developing countries. So most of the climate change impacts are going to fall on these lower to middle income countries. And as well as that, the average global 16-year-old, not only is going to experience impacts of a warmer world, but they're more likely to live in one of those areas that's more hard hit by these impacts as well. So this is where international and intergenerational inequalities with respect to climate change come together. So as members of the present generation, we hold the earth in trust for future generations. And this is something that's been discussed a lot. So Brown Weiss, who wrote The Planetary Trust, said, each generation must preserve the diversity of the resource base and to pass the planet to future generations in no worse condition than it receives it. Thus, the present generation serves both as a trustee for future generations and as a beneficiary of that trust. It implies that future generations have rights. Now, this is important because what we find is many countries around the world have actually codified that and put it into their laws. So intergenerational rights are now, to a healthy environment, are now part of the constitutions of 75% of the world's nations, which is pretty impressive. I bet you didn't know that, though, because it's generally not enforced. It's put in there because it sounds great, but it's not generally enforced. However, because that's there, it gives activists a tool to be able to hold companies and countries accountable. So over the past few decades, we see environmental groups and citizens around the world, including children, filing suits to enforce these rules that are enshrined in countries' constitutions. And we've seen more than 1,800 of these climate suits coming about. And you can see here over the years, past 20 years, they've really, really increased every year. We're seeing more and more of these. And we're actually seeing some that are becoming successful. So the courts are recognizing that a government violates its duty of care for citizens if it doesn't do enough to curb emissions. And they're looking at the science, and judges in Ireland and Germany and others now have acknowledged that insufficient climate action actually threatens the livelihood of future generations. And we're seeing litigation happening like this on every inhabited continent in the world. And we're starting to see some success too. But intergenerational justice isn't getting the recognition that it really deserves so far, but young people are pushing it. We actually have a name for this. It's called the Greta effect. And it's having an effect around the world, and the older generation is beginning to listen. And one of the best ways that we can help the younger generation to prepare and to be more resilient to the effects of the climate crisis is through nature-based solutions. So protecting the natural environment is one of the best ways to help the next generation coming up to have the tools it needs to be able to cope with these changes. And what nature-based solutions means is the restoring and the protecting of ecosystems to adapt to a changing climate, because it protects both people and the planet. Some types of nature-based solutions are wetlands, green urban spaces, mangroves are a great one, and then restoring areas that have been disturbed. And just as an example of how much better they actually function, and by the way, they're usually much, much cheaper as well. So great infrastructure like the seawall you see here often doesn't work in the intended way. So it seems really easy to put up a seawall there to protect the structure behind it. But what happens is the wave energy hitting that hard structure like that forces the water down, and it makes it actually erode the ground underneath it faster. So it actually makes erosion worse. Whereas if you left mangroves and seagrass beds and coral reefs there instead, they absorb and they take the energy that comes in with the waves and the wind and protects the human structures behind them. Whereas if we do not protect our natural ecosystems and we lose our mangroves and our coral reefs and our seagrass beds, all of that wave energy comes ashore and hits the human structures that are there behind them. So those ecosystems, we may not appreciate them until they're gone. Unfortunately, that's human nature. But protecting them and leaving them in place, protecting them helps them to protect us. It's important to keep those ecosystems there. So mangrove forests they're so important for so many different reasons: habitat for animals, protection from storms, fish nurseries, and also for carbon storage. They're actually one of the best ecosystems of the world at storing away carbon. They call that blue carbon. And in this graph, you can see that, see the bottom chart there, or the bottom line graph shows that the tropical rainforest, which is what they always thought would be where most of the carbon would be stored, because they have the biggest trees, actually isn't the ecosystem that has the most carbon. It's the mangroves. And that's because mangroves actually store a lot of the carbon in that whole ecosystem in the soil, because all of the leaves falling down and all of the root material rotting away in that anoxic anaerobic environment underneath the water, it doesn't decay. It just stays there and holds the carbon in place for thousands of years. So it's a really great, protecting this ecosystem protects that carbon. And because most of it is in the soil, it's a really secure way to store that away and to keep it sequestered and stored for forever, essentially. And other types of forests, you know, if you lose your forest fire or disease, that carbon is lost back up into the atmosphere. But in a mangrove forest, if you lose the soil, if you lose the forest, it's the carbon's still there in the soil, more than 90% in the soil, still safe. However, as soon as people come along and develop it, that's not the case, because you can't put your building or your road right on top of the mangrove mud. You have to dig it up, mix it with sand to make it stable. And as soon as you expose that mud full of carbon to the atmosphere, to oxygen, those compounds get oxygenated and it goes right back up into the atmosphere and makes climate change worse. So you've got rid of the trees, you stop the whole process of bringing carbon out of the atmosphere through through photosynthesis, but also you've taken all of that carbon that's been stored away for thousands of years and put it straight back into the atmosphere in one horrible pulse. So it's a double-edged sword there. So because mangroves are so important, they're now included in internationally accepted climate reduction protocols. And countries are now working to protect these ecosystems. And now we have innovative finance models to be able to fund the purchase and protection of mangroves that would otherwise be deforested, like through carbon offsets. And again, the co-benefits of mangroves are substantial. They provide habitat, erosion prevention, keeps the water clear, many, many different things. But perhaps most importantly, it gives an avenue for the next generation to be able to cope, to be able to have the tools necessary to be able to be resilient to the effects of climate change. So leaving intact ecosystems isn't just important for the wildlife or important for the water quality, but it's important for the next generation of humans that we leave behind so that they can better cope with the effects of climate change. And we all know about how the Amazon rainforest creates its own rainfall. Well, mangroves and other forests do the same thing. So that can help. We know that we're going to have more droughts, but if you have a forest there that's creating its own moisture in the air, that helps to mitigate that. And if you have those big rainfall events that we expect with climate change, these natural sponges, mangroves and other forests can absorb that extra rainfall and keeps it from creating these horrible flood events that we see in communities now. And we, trees lower temperature. I think we've all seen that. If you're walking anywhere in the sunshine and you step under a tree, it's so much cooler. It's not just the shade, but it's actually a cooler micro habitat there underneath those trees. And they've done studies and found, in fact, that tree planting and using cool materials and breezeways and things can actually reduce heat-related deaths by 20%, which is really significant because, in fact, heat causes more deaths worldwide than all other extreme weather events combined. So hurricanes and flooding and everything else, heat-related deaths are much higher. They don't get as much coverage because it's not as dramatic, but it's a big, big problem, only expected to get much worse. So protecting habitats protects people. It protects people through many different ways because we still have our habitats there that support fisheries, that support so many different things, rainfall, but it also helps to protect us from the effects of climate change and helps protect our children and our children's children from the effects of climate change as well. So keeping our intact habitats is extremely important for so many different reasons. So climate justice through the protection of natural ecosystems is the way that we can give the next generation the tools that it needs to cope with the changing climate. So thanks so much for having me and letting me speak to you all today. I very much enjoyed it and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
So that brings us to the end of our speakers today. I'm sure you'll agree that Catherine's talk gave us a real sense of the kind of bigger picture, and it was nice to hear a lot more about the natural heritage as well as some of the talks that we've already had about built heritage. So I can see that there's lots of questions and discussion already happening in the chat, which is really exciting. I don't know if we want to take a few questions and discuss some of those. So we have both, we have two of the speakers with us. We have Kushi, who we already heard from, and Dinara. Sorry, I'm just looking at what the chat is now. I can see people are already connecting with each other, which is really good. So does anyone have any questions at this stage, or shall we move to the breakouts?
I think there is one question for Priyanka, Luis. I'm sorry, from Priyanka
okay.
to Dinara.
Oh, do you want to, can you read
Or no, to
that out?
Kushi. I think it is to Kushi. Yeah. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, if you can, and then I'll introduce a few more people before the breakouts, and we can move straight into that in a few minutes.
Okay. So Priyanka is asking, Kushi, why do the people prefer to use concrete columns for this stilts if they are building traditional houses with local materials?
Yeah, hi. So the biggest problem with the rapid urbanization is that concrete as a material has reached all corners of the country, and these traditional practices are being forgotten day by day. And with the advancement in education, and concrete is the only material that is being taught, the newer constructions and the people who are constructing the new houses tend to focus more on concrete. So yeah. I hope that answers your question, Priyanka.
Thanks, Kushi. Thank you.
Okay, so if we don't have any more questions now, we'll move into the breakout session. So I already mentioned, but I can see we've got a few more people joined since then. So we are going to have a breakout discussion based on what we've heard this morning and more broadly on the theme of traditional knowledge and skills. Please do join us for this. We have obviously said this is youth led, so we have some young people who will be helping facilitate that with the discussion. And obviously, I know we've got a lot of young people who have joined in the call today, so please don't feel like you have to join these groups and you're going to be under pressure to have something to contribute. If you just want to, introduce yourself and then listen to other people's discussion, that's fine. If you're early on in your career or you're still studying, then I'm sure you will have something to add, but understand that it can be a little daunting moving into the groups. So please don't worry about that. Before we do that though, I want to introduce a few more people that we have in the call. So we have two people joining us that are going to help facilitate the conversation, and thank you to both of you. So we have Ku Salma. I don't know if you want to say hi, if you're still with us. And we have Suelia, is it Koch?
Coach, hello everyone.
Koch. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I'm looking for our discussions because I attended the first one. It was great. So don't hesitate.
And Ku, are you with us as well?
Yes. I'm here. I just got that. Yeah. So I'm representing this Southeast Asian Cultural Heritage Alliance. Yeah, and I'm one of the facilitators here today.
And then a few other people that I wanted to introduce that have helped with the coordination of these events is Pravali Vengetti. If you want to say hi.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be back for the second session today.
She's been working alongside myself and Yolo, and we also have Reem, who I think has joined us today.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, everyone, and welcome.
And I don't know if we still have Andrew Potts with us, who's been invaluable at helping us coordinate this from CHN. I don't know if you want to say hi.
Thank you, Louise. Just to say on behalf of the Climate Heritage Network Secretariat that we're really excited at seeing the power of youth-led care for culture to drive climate action. And this linkages that are being created today are fantastic. So thank you to you all for participating.
Thank you. If you give me a minute, I'm just popping people into breakouts now. I'm just doing it manually so that I can make sure that we're breaking up people that are, the speakers aren't all in the same session, for example. Andrea, I don't know if you want to join a group, but you'll have to join manually. I'd recommend room 3 because it's a slightly smaller one, and I am going to hop between the 3 just to participate a little bit in each conversation, and let me do that. So I'm going to pop you in the rooms now. That'll be for half an hour, and then I'll bring you back. I'll put a little message to say that you've got a couple of minutes before I just grab you back into the main room. And if you've got any questions, you should be able to put it in the chat and I'll be able to see it from there. So hopefully you can have a nice discussion, and we'll be putting you there in just a minute, or just about 2 seconds. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Louise.
Hopefully I gave you enough warning that time and you weren't too rudely pulled out of your rooms.
Go
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's just that you did, but we started on a very intense topic, and then I think the group was still speaking about this.
Well, hopefully we'll have time for some follow-up conversations sometime in the future. So we've just got just over 10 minutes left of the session. So I'm going to hand over to people to give just a very brief 1 or 2 minute kind of summary of the key points that you talked about. So first, if we can go to room 1, I don't know who that was. I think, was that?
I think that was our group.
I think it was. Do one of you want to give a brief overview of what the key points that you touched on?
A key point we touched on was like how the communities living there who are using those natural resources are very key. So for example, fishermen, they go out into the sea and they fish and they risk their lives every day, and and so they're able to see things that, say, a scientist who comes over isn't able to see. So it's very important that we engage with those communities and we do understand their perspective, because we don't know what we don't know until someone tells us what we don't know. I think that's how you put it. So it's very important that we make sure that we take a participatory approach. I'm not sure if that's the right term when in these projects, because they do accumulate over time and the impacts of it does accumulate over time. So in the interest of climate justice, we need to engage with those key stakeholders who do immediately recognize the impacts these projects have in their environment and community, because they probably know a lot better than, I guess, a lot of people who might just come over. Am I missing anything?
No, I think that was excellent. So I was just saying that, in our work with the fishermen, we recognize them as the indigenous peoples of that area, although they are not nationally recognized as indigenous peoples, and they are the ones who understand the area. So you can't conserve a natural area unless the local community wants to conserve it. So if they don't, if the local community doesn't want to defend and conserve it, then we can't really do much. It's just not sustainable conservation unless the local community is involved.
Great. That sounds like a really interesting conversation, and certainly the short bit that I was in was. So then we're moving to group 2.
Us. Hello, everyone. I guess we discussed many different topics, and I try to combine in an order. First, Kushi with us. So we talk about the concrete material, and from Cayman Island, we learn how the production of cement and concrete affect the ecosystem, and also to building with modern materials, how affect the temperature of the cities. So we discuss these issues, and we try to understand how our ancestor and local communities, local traditional knowledge, what they know about nature and what they about human needs. And also we discussed availables of the local materials, and also the traditional knowledge, how to rediscover, how to benefit from the seniors' knowledge. And what we discussed and highlight more is the perception of community towards the local materials and techniques. The mass production and have a good, I forgot the word, sorry, like being rich and the local and traditional themes, poverty. So we say that narratives need to be changed. And also the duty of governments came to our discussion because some of the legislation and taxes encourage, promote the use of modern materials, not the traditional ones. And lastly, we conclude that we need a balance between what local communities did, what we have as a traditional knowledge, and what is evolving and what we need as a in the modern world. The balance is become our final words. And if I miss anything, please add our team. Thank you.
Thanks, that sounds really interesting as well. Yeah, in group 3, and then I'll kind of pull together a few thoughts from all the groups. Yulo, did you want to say something about what your group was discussing?
Yeah, sure. Well, we started a discussion with the concept of intergenerational justice from Catherine's presentation. And what we discussed about that is that it is not used boldly yet in the cultural heritage, and also that it is compelling for cultural heritage actors. Then we move to the traditional skills, and there we discussed about why mostly they are not being taught in the contemporary practice, and that we mostly should learn them outside the formal education instruction outside universities. And also, however, there was an input from Prabali, who mentioned that in India, at least for her, there were courses where the students approach to the traditional knowledge and skills. So that's a good news, and maybe something that could be implemented in other parts of the world. And also regarding traditional skills, I think we discussed about how traditional skills, and also about cultural preserving cultural heritage. This is because of the mangroves issue. We discussed about the role that having a government that has enough transparency, that is not corrupt, will play in actually achieving the goals to climate adaptation. And also this led us to talking about the use of cement and the incentives, the economical incentives that there are in many places around the world to use concrete as a construction material instead of other materials and instead of other techniques. And yeah, so the conclusion there was there was actually in the very last minute we were discussing about Mumbai case that Priyanka mentioned, about that discussion they had there, where they concluded that even though there is a huge necessity for housing, concrete is not the answer, that there should be another options to concrete. And also finally we concluded that creating the enabling conditions for preserving traditional architecture in with society, and also inside the governments will be the difference. So I don't know if Andrew, if you would like to to share something else that I missed, or probably Priyanka or Anne?
I think the point that we were just onto at the very end, I wish we could have even more time to discuss, but Yolo, you did a good job of mentioning it. Pravali's question about, to some extent, techniques like concrete have displaced traditional building approaches under the claim that it's a cheaper and faster way to deliver affordable housing and better conditions for people. And people need better conditions and they need affordable housing. And so is that claim true? I mean, it certainly doesn't take into account the externalities of concrete. But what is our knowledge about, can traditional approaches, traditional materials, traditional knowledge deliver at scale high quality, affordable housing for people? And if we want to see traditional knowledge and local materials valued at scale, we're going to have to prove that the answer is yes, or something like that. I mean, those issues are big, and I'm glad it came up. I think Anne had a good frame for thinking about this question, by the way.
I would like to respond to that. And that is that, as we get into the fourth industrial revolution, what's really at stake are livelihoods. So building in concrete is not, it's going to save time and money in a certain sense, but actually, you're not creating any jobs. You're not creating enough jobs or the right kind of jobs. And of course, one of the factors is that the whole, the place where you get your resource. So for example, if you were building in wood, you would have to have a place where this wood comes from in a very sustainable way. And that, usually the policy is not strong enough to protect the sources of water, wood, whatever building materials, the thatch or whatever it is that you're using to build. And people used to get it from, the immediate surroundings. And because the space where, of traditional habitats have been diminished to the bare necessity, that more roads are created, more land is taken away for other purposes, so that people are just then squeezed into like concrete high-rise apartments, and they think that that's economical, but actually it's part of a larger, very unsustainable way of living, and as we go further down the road, it's actually degrading the environment, and it's actually not creating jobs. It's actually taking away jobs.
Yeah, I think it was actually Luis came to our conversation just at the right time, and I think that the fact that concrete is perhaps not the answer to this question is something I think we all agree on. And I think what Andrew meant is that when that came up, I think that we need to have conversations about what the solution is to solve housing and climate change at the same time. There must be a solution somewhere. There must surely. I don't have the answer, but I think that's something that also I think Priyanka said that there's something you mentioned that there have been conversations about that question in Mumbai, was it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, this is a really, really fascinating conversation, but I can see that we're kind of over time now. So I'd like to kind of wrap up. Reem, I can see that you have your hand up. Are you wanting to add something on this? Or
Yes.
have you got a point that we could kind of roll into the summary?
Yeah, I'd like to add something because we mentioned affordability. I think that in the global south, like traditional buildings and houses would be more affordable. But another problem that we also discussed in our breakout room is that the problem is also the social image associated with the material. People don't want to be living in houses built for the poor. And there is a famous architect in Egypt, Hassan Fathi, who's been building in earth and like innovating in earthen architectures, but he was called the architect of the poor because it is automatically associated with poverty. So people want development, want to see like new techniques and new houses, and concrete allows them to have new forms. And also because it's industrial, it allows to to have a quick and fast development. It's not like earth, because for example, for like new earthen structures, it's difficult to have the same resistance. So it takes more time to build new new forms and like higher houses with earth. So I think that the social value of the material is very important, and the framework in which earthen architectures are put, because it's not put in an evolving framework, allowing to have like a professional development, to have like new ways of building with earth. This is I think a very important point, especially in the global south, where people want to have like towers and to see buildings in like in concrete high buildings, and they associate this with development and with like new life. Thank you.
Thanks, Reem. That was a really good kind of final point. So I'll try and wrap this up in just a minute or so, since we're already over time. First, I'd like to suggest that this conversation that we've just been having about the challenges of concrete, that we have that as a future session. I've kind of jotted down something about concrete and the problems that it raises for both culture and the environment, and we can maybe kind of discuss solutions to that as well. And since one of the purposes of these sessions is to kind of hopefully launch a future youth forum, I would suggest that for a future session, probably next year, that we can discuss that. So yeah, to kind of bring all of these things together, I can see that honestly, I'm astounded at the range of things that we've talked about today. I had certain expectations coming into it, but I would say that the real thing that came through is there's a tension between various different priorities. And I think everyone here obviously thinks that traditional knowledge is really valuable, but they can see that there's sometimes some conflict with policies or with other priorities that people have. So that's, yeah, really, really interesting. And similar to the discussions that we had on Monday, there was a lot of people talking about communities and people and listening to local communities, and yeah, that's really interesting that that's kind of come through. And the thing that I find so interesting about this is the commonalities between the different geographic areas that we all live and work in, that even though they are really different, there's a lot of similarities on these things that I've just highlighted. So that'll bring us to the end, and I finally just want to say thank you to everyone for participating, particularly those of you that have helped pull this together and facilitated today. We could not have done it without you, and hopefully you'll all stay in touch in future and get involved in the new youth forum when that develops, and we'll stay in touch and let you know what the outcomes of this session and the other sessions in this series are. So thank you.
Thank you, Louise. That's brilliant.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Louise. So Louise, I'll see you at 5:30.
Yep.
Or I guess it's
4:30 my time.
4:30. Sorry. I don't know why I can't get 4:30
No, it's
your
okay.
time. I'll make you co-host and I have to drop off. Or not
Yeah.
co-host, the host.
The host. Yep,
The big
that's
host.
perfect. That's
Okay.
perfect. And then I can make some other people co-hosts. I'm just gonna share a Google Drive with you that where we've been dropping all the various information. Not that you have to like look at that